Welcome to the story that never ends. That is conference realignment talk, as that conversation never ends, and it's going to continue here on this episode of Mic'd Up, presented by Martin Lawn Services, this Hump Day edition. That's Mike Vukovican. I am Mike Osti, as always, and we are going to talk about an alliance, as several conferences formed an alliance and what that really means, what that'll mean for the schedule, and maybe what some fans will get to see or want to see out of that alliance. What that'll mean for the Big 12 is they keep trying to putter along as they're not a member of that alliance. And then Dave Wannstedt, former Pitt coach, certainly tapped into college football, you'd imagine, with his connection covering it on Fox, which ironically covers the Big 12, and what he thinks about what's going to happen and how he thinks that's going to affect the Big 12 and several teams in the Big 12, including West Virginia, who has been the focal point of conference realignment for many, and really for good reason. So we're going to get us started right there, Mike, with the alliance. And that means the Pac-12, the ACC, the Big Ten, they're getting together, they're forming an alliance. It's not all of a sudden they're going to be all these teams in one conference per se, but they are kind of trying to combat the SEC taking over the world by adding two other superpowers and really having enough teams and enough quality teams and major brand names. The SEC, if the alliance would ever form into one big thing, the SEC could easily split into two conferences and be pretty good in both sides of it. They have that much going on. So this is try to combat that, make sure they still get out of conference games, make sure they're still tight schedule-wise, and they don't get destroyed like, say, what is happening to the Big 12, which we'll get to here in a moment. Do you like this alliance? Do you think this was a good decision for these conferences to form this alliance to kind of save themselves? And do you feel this will lead to these conferences expanding, which will then trickle into what Dave Wannstedt said? And what would you like to see schedule-wise for Pitt in particular? Obviously, it's Pittsburgh sports now.
I think we're still learning about this, really, Mike. I don't know that we know anything more than just the term alliance.
Right.
I think it's more right now, as far as details given, it seems like more of a symbolic thing than actual substance. The reason being is there's a couple things. Number one, the scheduling they talked about with all the future schedules, they want teams to honor those schedules.
Right.
So who knows when we're going to really see this. The other thing is, I find it hard to believe that maybe it's the cynic in me, but with college football, the way it's not like basketball. Maybe this will work more in basketball, but I have a hard time believing that these schools are going to be loading up their non-conference schedule after playing, obviously tough, semi-tough conference schedule. They're not going to be loading up their non-conference schedule. Pitt's not going to all of a sudden.
Or it shouldn't, really. If
right,
you have
exactly.
the out-of-conference schedule be too brutal when your in-conference schedule is pretty tough, and then you filter in 1 or 2 years where you have a tough out-of-conference game, you're out of it then. You're going to have 2 or 3 losses every year.
Right, that's what I don't know. I don't know that everyone knows the details, because there's no way in heck Pat Narduzzi is going to allow Heather Lyke to all of a sudden schedule USC and Michigan in their non-conference schedule, despite how attractive that might look.
Yeah,
that's career suicide. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So I don't know that. Maybe what'll happen is, maybe every year they'll pick up one either a Pac-12 school or a Big Ten school or something. I don't think we really know. The other thing that has me a little had me laugh is when there was no agreement signed with this thing, and everyone said, I forget which commissioner said, we looked each other in the eye.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
We have a handshake agreement.
Yeah.
Come on, man.
And then they say it's official. You're seeing headlines. It's official. We've learned in college football this year more than ever before. Just ask the Big 12. Nothing is official, even when you have a contract. Oklahoma and Texas were signed, and then they just turn around, wake up one morning and say, we don't like it. So
I don't know. I think this, like I said at the beginning, I think this is all for show and to maybe put their middle fingers up at the SEC and everyone else to say we're strong and we're going to be able to survive in that. But I think time will tell what this really means for everybody. But it can't be a bad thing. That's the only thing.
I don't think it's
not bad.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing for fans of teams in those conferences. Certainly not a bad thing for Pitt, who stabilizes themselves in the ACC right now. It could be bad if you make the schedule too brutal, of course, certainly for middle tier programs rather than the elite programs. And even them, their schedules are already tough enough. I don't know if they want to add too much more in there. So schedule wise in basketball, it certainly could help you because you have so many games. So many teams you need to schedule throughout a year, and you do need to have quality games or you're not going to get in certain seed spots and get off the bubble and playing below teams to you, and especially with like Pitt, who has lost some of those in recent years. That doesn't help. So basketball wise, this could be perfect, but yeah, it does to me feel more like an intimidation or some cohesiveness to the SEC that, hey, you might want to start this being superpower conferences and having two of these. We're going to be three conferences. You can't force us to break up. This is the case. We have, and if we do have some issue like that occurs, we're together. So it's not all of a sudden going to be the SEC running the world. It does seem like some power shift that these other schools, because there are some brand names in there. You mentioned them: Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, USC, even though they're not as good as they used to be, Oregon. Those schools overall want to say, hey, we're powerhouses too, and we're not just going to let you take over the world. So it does kind of feel more like that. It's not like they're all going to form one conference. My question to you is, and this will segue into what Dave Wannstedt said, because, again, we're still reading tea leaves now, that despite the Big 12 is going to operate this year, and we don't know exactly when Oklahoma and Texas are going to leave, but it'll happen some point before 2025, probably sooner. They're not a part of this alliance. So before we get into fully what Wannstedt said and where these teams are going to potentially go, why do you think, if the Big 12 is saying they're going to stay together as is, why were they not called to be part of the alliance? They're obviously against the SEC. And number two, should they have been part of the alliance, or is everyone basically saying to the Big 12, we need you to pass away, basically? They're trying to kick them out of college football.
Yeah, one of the funnier things that I saw, aside from we looked each other in the eye and having an agreement, was once again, I forget which commissioner, because all three of them spoke, but they talked about how the Big 12, how important they are.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
And I was thinking, if they're that important and you want to make them work, why aren't they part of your agreement?
Because this could have saved the Big 12. If you would put them in the alliance, it would help save the Big 12.
What I think is going to happen now is basically they're in time here, because this isn't going to all of a sudden happen.
No.
In 2 months. I think what they're forcing the Big 12's hand, and they're saying, okay, we're going to pick some of your better schools, and the rest of the schools are going to go off to the AAC or whoever. So in line with what Wannstedt said, I think they're going to target schools that they want.
Yeah.
And the rest of them, it's going to suck for them. But I don't know what their futures are. Kansas State will have a future somewhere, probably with Kansas. West Virginia will definitely have a future somewhere. And then after that, I don't know with those schools. I think that's a smart thing, but I think that's where we're headed here. Is they're going to try to force the hand of the Big 12, get them to worry, and now hopefully take some deal and join these conferences within the next year or two.
That's exactly what it tells me as well. And Mic'd Up here, presented by Martin Lawn Services. The number there behind Mike here on the video, 412-849-5894, to contact Doug Martin for all your lawn care needs. That's nail on the head, because to me, they may say all the lip service they want. What this tells me, because this is one thing we weren't sure of. People have been speculating. I was getting a lot of views speculating on where certain schools are going to go, and West Virginia in particular, and if they fit in the ACC. That's been a major conversation, even nationally. Even where these other schools that you mentioned are going to go, in the Pac-12 looking like maybe they're going to add some. But nobody ever knew for sure if those conferences wanted to expand, because outside of getting Notre Dame to be a full-time member, which isn't going to happen, it's not 100% sure if those conferences wanted to expand. They maybe should for TV deal purposes, but we didn't know if they wanted to. This tells me they want to, because this tells me that they want to have the Big 12 at an arm length right now so they can force their hand and eventually pluck their schools. And that'll then segue into what Dave Wannstedt said. Dave Wannstedt kind of threw out a whole roadmap of what everyone's going to do. He feels like Kansas State is going to be in the Pac-12. He has West Virginia in the ACC. He has several schools moving around. Now, it makes a lot of – I will tell you, this is the only thing I'm concerned, and I think John Steigerwald said this, that what Wannstedt said makes sense. Yeah. It makes too much sense for college football. I believe he's tapped in. I know he wouldn't say things out of his where. It makes sense geographically. It makes sense athletically. It makes sense a lot of ways for those programs to be where they would be. Certainly does. But it makes too much sense as well. So that's my only trepidation, is when things make sense with conference realignment, it doesn't seem to happen. Geographics have not really mattered all that much. But speaking on West Virginia, of course, for WV Sports Now, he does have West Virginia going in the ACC, which was really, I would say, the first time that somebody of stature said that it kind of shifted the focus to a lot of people who were saying that wasn't going to happen for academics or whatever the case may be, are now saying, if Wannstedt's saying it and he's saying in private meetings he heard it, maybe it actually is kind of a likely scenario. It seems like the conversation has now shifted where people now believe maybe 75-25 it's going to occur. Does that make does anything Wannstedt said make you believe it's going to occur in a more likely scenario? Do you believe what he's saying in terms of those teams being in those conferences, or is it still all up in the air for you?
Well, I would assume Dave, obviously he's tied in with college football, with Big Ten, obviously with Fox. There's a bigger picture than all of us really know what's going on right now as far as what college football is going to look like in 5 years. And I think this is where, whether we go down to 4 Power Fives conferences, or I guess it wouldn't be Power Five then, they'd come up with a new name or whatever. But this is where this is heading. I think they're trying to figure this all out. Where do they want to go? How does that tie in with the playoffs? And obviously the executives, TV executives, have to be a part of that. So I'm sure Dave, work that he does with the Big Ten and the being in Chicago full time and being with Fox, he wouldn't just say something like that. He's had to heard it from somebody else, and it just might be a matter of time. And you're right; it does make too much sense to form Pitt. All of a sudden, you put Pitt and you add West Virginia, then it starts looking decent as far as what they're doing with these conferences. Because right now, Pitt just being there, Pitt should be in the Big Ten.
Right. If you do put, and that's what I said too to people of what does West Virginia bring? Not only do they bring a great athletic program right now, but it is well beyond that. I get media market. It'll be the same as Pittsburgh, and even with some connection to DMV with DC and Virginia schools. They wouldn't bring necessarily a new media market. I get it, but they would help some schools like Pitt in terms of attendance. They would be able to bring a lot. And where we're going right now with conference realignment, I don't think we even know right now what college football or what these conferences are looking at, because before when they realigned, it was all about media market in 2011 when it was realigned. That's why West Virginia wasn't attractive beyond academics. There's no need to have 2 schools with Pitt media. They don't need people rolling 2 credentials when they were realigning at that point. Maybe what should have happened, Mike, and this is crazy, maybe people should have had some foresight to what was going to happen in the future. They basically realigned things for 5 years. or it went to 10, but they didn't really think to how the world was going to go with people cutting the cord on cable. It doesn't matter where games are TV wise or local market, because people are using apps, etc. So if that keeps progressing, it's going to it might even be about what we're doing here at Pittsburgh Sports Now and WV Sports Now. It might be about subscribers, eyeballs, how many fans you think you're going to get, who's going to click, who's going to subscribe, where you're going to have interest. If you have a program that brings tons of interest, it's going to be attractive to you. But it is interesting to me, this not only West Virginia that was involved in him saying it in the ACC, which again, it makes too much sense. And that's certainly a positive for West Virginia. I also think that Shane Lyons' connection recently, Oliver Luck, former West Virginia athletic director, tons of connections there, still talks to the school and Shane Lyons. being with the Big 12 and different connections there. I think once the Big 12 realizes they're dead, there might be some backdoor deals. There's probably backdoor deals going on now, but we just don't know where this is going to head. But I will say it's interesting that Baylor and some of those schools, Baylor winning a recent national title in basketball, not being included. You are going to, as you said, you're going to have some schools kind of screwed over here.
Yeah, all this is going to eventually be tied into where this goes with the playoffs and how many teams.
It's probably going to delay things.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like
the expansion.
We're years away from finding what the master plan is by the heads of these conferences, but they're forming it right now. They're figuring out what they want to do right now, and we'll see. But what would your ideal? Let's say West Virginia goes to the ACC.
Yeah.
What would the new coastal be? What would it would be? West Virginia, Syracuse.
Yeah, it's funny because it'd be the coastal Pitt, West Virginia, and Syracuse. There's no coast there.
Virginia Tech, Virginia.
Yeah.
And I guess North Carolina and all the rest of this. North Carolina would be down with NC. I'm trying to figure out.
If you want to keep the North Carolina schools together, do you have Miami there? Do you have? I mean, it doesn't have to necessarily connect geographically. Do you have Miami with those schools? Have the North Carolina schools all together? But you probably want to have.
You want to split Miami and Clemson.
You probably want to split Miami and Clemson, unless you want to split Florida State and Clemson. It depends on what you think of Florida State and Miami. Obviously, right. Miami is better now, but Florida State has won a more recent national title. That might be what you think of those two programs, where Florida State becomes. But yeah, if you want to, brand name wise, if you want to split Miami and Clemson, then you would have to do that.
The funny thing about all this, Mike, is the talk for years with Pitt has been with the fans is they should play their rivals. They should play West Virginia. They should play Penn State.
Right.
Who knows? Maybe with all this stuff with the alliance.
They're in the same division.
Pitt and West Virginia are going to be in the same conference. They have to play each other. And then with this alliance, maybe Pitt, Penn State becomes an automatic game every year for Pitt. And there you go. You have your on the schedule every year. Although it took too many years.
Took a pandemic to
make this happen. Pitt actually ends up in the end playing West Virginia and Penn State every year.
Yeah, I mean that could be, although because always has been a conversation of who would you want to play more for a Pitt fan in West Virginia or Penn State too, and we've talked about this before that they're both rivals, but it appears there's more of a hatred to Penn State, where West Virginia there might be more of a respectful rivalry. Certainly the way things are now. If you have the alliance right now makes sense, but once these teams move conferences and say once the ACC gets West Virginia and then adds whoever else they want to add, and you get Kansas State and Iowa State and those schools in the Pac-12 or the Big Ten or wherever they're going to go because their quality adds to those conferences, do they need the alliance anymore? Maybe then once you're set up, maybe then the alliance is a negative, like you're saying. Maybe then these schools are saying, well, now we got what we wanted. We got a new TV deal, more money. Our conference is stabilized enough because now we have 12 or 14 teams or whatever the case may be against the powerhouse that is the SEC. Why do we want to add all these non-conference games? I mean, I don't know. I mean, as you're mentioning, there's no pen to paper right now. They're saying they have a wink. They could easily add West Virginia and then say add UCF or another school and then say to those conferences, we're good. We don't need to align anymore. We have what we want as a conference. So,
I think you do that just out of
that would look bad, obviously.
Yeah, it would look bad, but also just to safeguard yourself because you don't know the big SEC all of a sudden the one school that everyone's going to continue to talk about should be an SEC school because it fits everything that they're doing as far as athletics is Clemson.
Yeah, and again, if you add West Virginia but Clemson goes the SEC, it's all screwed again.
Exactly.
It's all screwed again.
Exactly. Yeah. A question for you, last one. I put a poll question up last night. Let's just say that West Virginia joins the Big 12 or the ACC. Let's just assume that.
Okay.
Who's one? If you had to pick one matchup every year in football between either someone from the Big 10 or the Pac-12 that West Virginia would play every year, Who would it be? I threw that out there on PSN as a.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely an interesting question because you have to think, do you want it to be a program that would be a great matchup and this great program and have these historical contexts, or do you want it to be a winnable game necessarily? And there is a rival in one of those that maybe they could go back to the ACC. I would not go Maryland. I know there might be some West Virginia fans that would say Maryland. They play every now and then. They get the rivalry back. I don't even think that's really a legit rivalry. There's no event that matters between those schools. They just play for recruiting purposes. I wouldn't say Maryland. And I know some would also say Ohio State, but they would lose the game every year. They would never beat. I know there are a lot of West Virginia fans that hate Ohio State. It's more jealousy. They just would never beat Ohio State. So if I don't want Ohio State and I don't want Maryland because I don't believe it's really a rivalry, and I know Bob Huggins, Mike, does not want to be playing with the Pac. That's the only thing. I don't think he would be getting in those meetings immediately saying, don't give me Pac-12 schedule in basketball. He doesn't like those games, doesn't want to play those games. He would flip a table if he got all these Pac-12 teams. Otherwise, maybe Michigan, just because that's a legit brand name. That would be a good team to beat. But I think Michigan, unlike Ohio State, we've now seen this for 20 years, certainly with Harbaugh being there, and who knows how long he'll be there. That wouldn't be like playing Ohio State where you would never win. Michigan would be a beatable team that would be a quality enough win when you beat them. They're a ranked team, but they wouldn't be so powerful that they would destroy you every year unless they turned it back to what they used to be. But maybe Michigan, that would be interesting. It's not too far geographically. There's some historical context. Both institutions in football have been around for 100 plus years. They're both in the top 15 all time in wins. And maybe Michigan would be. And also you have the Rich Rodriguez connection. That would be interesting, possibly.
Yeah, that's what I would go with the. I'd go with the Michigan. If we're doing basketball, I've always said that I don't understand why Pitt doesn't play Ohio State. I just think in basketball with losses.
And West Virginia does play Ohio State a lot.
Yeah, it just seems like too natural it'd be a good little matchup between those two basketball. I can see why they don't want to play in football, but for basketball, it just never made much sense. But I'd like to see Pitt play Michigan or. I'd love the USC too. That would be cool. But if I have West Virginia and Michigan in football, do you have one for Pitt in football as we wrap up? Yeah, football. Like I said, I'd like to see him play Michigan, Michigan or USC.
Okay, yeah.
Football, yeah. USC.
USC would be cool as well.
Yeah, that'd be that's what you want to do if you're going to do this. You're not looking for Pitt to play. Washington State, right, or Northwestern, or nothing against North or Illinois. I don't care. That's not going to draw more people than anybody in the ACC will. And you start getting some of these other schools. Wisconsin would be a good matchup for Pitt as well. Pitt and Wisconsin. Yeah. That'd be a good solid. And Pitt's going to go there. I forget when. Within the next 2 years, Pitt has a game scheduled back to back with a home and home with Wisconsin, so that'll be good. Yeah. At the end of the day, though, I really do feel, and I'm not normally an optimist. I certainly can be a cynic in this world, but I do feel like programs like West Virginia, like Oklahoma State, like maybe even Kansas State. You'd hope Baylor, but probably not Baylor, just because of what they mean overall, even though they've been a solid basketball program recently. West Virginia, Oklahoma State in particular, those after you get Oklahoma and Texas out of the Big 12, I would say West Virginia, Oklahoma State, those type of schools that are just solid across the board athletically, that have tons of fans across the country. I do feel like they're going to it's going to be okay. I just, for some reason in me, I don't feel like they're going to be in the AAC, but that would be the other option. So Wannstedt's providing some optimism here on what he thinks, what he's hearing. But I do feel like there is some reason, there's enough connections, there's enough fans, they'd bring enough things. I do feel like at some point they're going to be taken care of, but this could be years down the line, of course. We heard Wannstedt today. We could hear another former coach, somebody else tapped in tomorrow, say what Wannstedt said is totally wrong. Quite frankly, Mike, I'm not even so sure if the ACC, if that is what they're going to do, or even the Big 12 certainly trying to save themselves, or any of those conferences, they maybe didn't like maybe Wannstedt spoke too early or out of turn, because you have to remember Wannstedt speaking does carry weight. And when the ACC when there were rumors
that West Virginia or certain schools were calling the ACC, and that we had those rumors and we talked about those. That was right around the time that ESPN got involved. And then the Big 12 and ESPN were arguing, and ESPN was telling certain conferences to shut up because a lot of this is about ESPN and TV deals. Yeah. ESPN might very well call the ACC and say, you need to tell him to stop. I mean, this is a lot of backdoor deals going on. So there's some agreements not to be doing some things that Wannstedt is basically saying are going on. So he might have spoke out of turn, but we'll see where this goes. That'll do it for this edition of the show. And then tomorrow we certainly could be back and say this all was for naught because somebody else spoke and said it means nothing. You just don't know. This is the conversation that will never die in college football. And I guess both of our hope, I think, is that at least for this coming season, that every single game, every single broadcast, and every single time someone does something, we don't have the entire commentary and studio show be conference realignment, what it's going to mean. We'd like to be able to have 1 year of football. We will see.
Games. Yeah.
Yeah, we will see. I'm pessimistic to that occurring, unfortunately. That'll do it from this edition of Mic'd Up here on PSN, WVSN, and also